This video is dedicated to composition and more specifically some key rules to abide by when composing your video. Now, composition is something that you will only notice if you know what to really look for. For example, the eye of a non-video or photo keen person won't necessarily look at a video and say, that's not great composition. But as a videographer or photographer, if you want to stand out and make your images look great, you should be sure to keep these rules in mind when shooting. Firstly, we have the rule of thirds. This is because it's a 3x3 square and generally directs your viewer to look at a specific part of the screen. So if you're shooting an interview or some sort of portrait, you should always have subjects on a third. This gives you a lot of room in the rest of the frame to fill it with other relevant objects that draw your viewer's attention. Each time I film one of these videos, I always make sure that I am on a third, and then things such as my microphone or my PC are on a separate third, as it breaks up the image nicely and gives a good bit of depth, leaving just the right amount of space elsewhere. This also means that the frame is not too full or too empty. Another thing to remember with the rule of thirds is that you are trying to make your viewer look at something specific. For example, if you're taking landscape shots and you either want to draw the viewer's attention to the sky or the horizon, whatever you are trying to draw attention to should be on a third. So for example, in this shot, I want to draw your attention to the sky, so the horizon is on the lower third and the sky is on the upper third. However, in this example, I want to try and draw your attention to the horizon, so the horizon is now on the upper third. Next, we have something called leading lines. Leading lines are exactly what they say on the tin. They are lines in your image designed to draw your viewer's attention to the subject. So let's take a look at an example. You can see in this music video that I shot, my leading lines were the handrails, and this was aimed at drawing your attention to the subject. Now, it's not always possible to capture leading lines as some scenes simply won't have them. However, they are a great way to add a little extra spice to your image. Headroom is another one to consider. In this image here, you can see that there is way too much headroom, which makes the subject look small and gives the illusion that they are sinking. Whereas here, there is no headroom at all, which makes your subject almost look too big. There's no harm in applying different headroom depending on the scene that you are shooting. For example, in feature films, you may notice a lot of close-up shots where there is zero headroom, but this is okay as it's there purposely to make the audience feel intimate with the subject. Usually in a dramatic scene such as this one in Breaking Bad, Walter has very little headroom, which gives off the illusion of power and drama. Now, it's different when you are doing interview or portrait shots though. You should always have the correct amount of headroom. A good way to gauge this is to use the rule of thirds, ensuring that subjects' eyes sit on or near the upper third, which will then give the proper amount of headroom. It's also worth noting in interview situations that you want space on the opposite side of where your subject is. This is also known as looking room. If I was to look to my right or your left, there's all of this looking room here. Symmetry is also another great way to draw your viewer's attention to a specific subject, as not everything is symmetrical. For example, if you looked at your face in the mirror, you will notice that it is not 100% the same on both sides. This is what we're used to seeing in real life, so when we see something that is perfectly symmetrical, it's very pleasing to look at. In videography, symmetry is something that adds drama to an image, and can also convey power. This example from the film Full Metal Jacket is perfectly symmetrical and helps portray the true power of Sergeant Hartman. The symmetry and leading lines here also draws your attention to the sergeant, who of course is one of the main characters in the scene. Another great example is this scene from The Shining, where we see a boy riding his trike down the hallway with two girls at the end of it. This again shows perfect symmetry and the clever use of leading lines, which draws your attention to the subjects. Another key factor of composition is depth. Now, creating depth in an image will give extra impact to the subject. So there are three key things to think about here: foreground, subject, background. The foreground shouldn't be fully in focus, the subject should be, then the background shouldn't be. This adds emphasis to the subject itself. Here's an example of where I've used it. Here you can see that my subject is Georgia, who was the leading lady for the video. My foreground for this shot was AK, who was the artist, and my background was the venue. Using this technique, I was able to draw the viewer's attention through a streamlined event to then follow the subject of the scene. Notice how your eyes follow AK until Georgia comes into the scene, then we follow her shortly afterwards. That said, you don't always need a foreground, as you can create depth using a lower aperture in your lens. Depth of field is where your subject stands out from the background, which makes the image appear less flat. Now, lowering the aperture of your lens will create a great depth of field, giving you a brilliant background blur effect. This is a great way of making your subject stand out, so let's look at an example. The image on the left was shot at a high aperture, and you can see that the subject has the same amount of focus as the background, whereas the image on the right has a much lower aperture and therefore creates a background blur effect. This also gives distance between the subject and the background, helping the subject stand out. So next time you're watching TV, just keep an eye out for these composition rules. You'll actually be surprised how many you pick up that you previously wouldn't have noticed. That's it for composition for now, so keep shooting and I will see you in the next video.